Okay, here's an oddity. It's one about resurrection. Resurrection. Most people don't equate the Jesus of the Bible to actually a resurrection deity, but that's actually what went on. We're supposed to go to heaven. We're not supposed to walk the world as an undead or do anything like that. That's not what this video is about at all, but we are looking at a mummy here, Seti the First. It's always, especially in some photographs, to me, kind of look like Christopher Reeve, Superman as we know of him, the modern day, more modern Superman, not the most modern version of him. Behind him on the left is a pyramid, but over here on the right is a lady who passed away in 1985 at the age of 81. Her name's Dorothy Eady. We're going to tell you a story about her. She was born in London in 1904 to a middle-income family, if you will. But she was able to go to Catholic school and so on, but that's, in America, you think that is being hoity-toity, but it really wasn't, especially in England at that time. It was pretty much public school. Christianity kind of controlled the learning of things back then for more of a reason than now. But whenever she was about 3.5, they lived in a 2-story house, Tudor style, and she fell down the stairs. And she was actually knocked unconscious, twitched a few times and wouldn't move. Her mom, horrified, had him go out and get the doctor, and of course this was 1907 or 8 at this time. Took him a while to get there, but whenever they got there, there would still, during this whole time, been no movement. They ended up checking her out for a pulse and other signs, and they were right there with them whenever it did happen, and she had been with the baby the whole time, her mother, since after this happening. And that doctor said that she was dead. And the mom kind of seemed like she had already come to terms with that before he had gotten there. But within an hour of the point of him being called to come to the house, getting there and all this going on and the hysteria of it, all of a sudden her eyes open and blink a few times. She gets up and runs up to her room, starts calling out and playing. When they go upstairs, she's bouncing on her bed, jumping up and down, and she's fine all of a sudden. And her parents are kind of furious with the doctor, but he assures them, and they saw it, she was dead. So that just kind of gets written off because she's not. She's hungry now, and so on, and just looks like she doesn't even know it ever happened. One thing that was different, though, was her parents noticed that her voice changed. Seemed to have an accent. Now, she's only 3.5 or so she's got a vocabulary going pretty good already, but all of a sudden she starts sounding different. I had one of my first daughters and had that happen to her, and noticed that her vocabulary, some of the sounds started changing a little bit. Almost sounded like that. So I insisted that she get her ears checked out. Whenever they did, they found out, yeah, she's infected totally, to the point that, well, it repeated over and over, and she had to get a tube put into her ears. But it was good that I noticed it whenever I did, or it could have caused ear damage and so on. But she had this voice change, and it's not unheard with head injuries and concussions and stuff, because it kind of mimics an accent or a speech impediment somebody would have, and all of a sudden it would sound a little different. And like if you were in the South, you would lose your drawl and somewhat, in situations like that, and it would sound to certain people like you had an accent. So not much was thought about that, although that was checked out. And she was checked out and seemed to pass with flying colors. That doctor still insisted that they had witnessed it with the check that he had done with them, although they hadn't listened to the stethoscope themselves. The lady had succumbed to the idea that she was dead before I even got here. Well, after that, this accent thing usually goes away, but hers did not, and it lingered on for quite some time. Dorothy started having reoccurring dream, and she started telling her parents about a big building with big pillars in front of it over and over again, and her favorite garden. But at 4 now, she couldn't really articulate well what she was trying to talk about, it seemed, and she would get frustrated, but it kept happening, and she kept telling about it. This garden was beside this building on the left, with columns or pillars with stairs leading up to it, and the flowers and trees and smells, and her friends were there, and she was older. And people have little magic friends sometimes and so on, so one could write it off for that, but it just kept going on. And so it kind of became disconcerting to her parents whenever she started calling this dream place her actual home. This was her home, and she insisted that it was. Her mom would try to correct her, but she was insistent that this was her home. She cried about it, threw a fit, and that her home was when she went to sleep. Sometimes, but not every night, she got to go home, and she would wake up crying if she didn't get to go home. Yeah, so it got way out of hand here for a while, but it gets deeper, quite a bit deeper. Continue. At bedtime, she began crying, saying that she was going home to her garden building. And at age 5-ish, her parents took her to the British Museum, and all was seemingly normal as they went around and looked at different exhibits and so on. As they were looking around through all the exhibits in the museum, everything was normal, as I said, until she reached the ancient Egyptian wing. Whenever she did, she was at first startled acting, and then she ran off through the exhibit saying, "It's here, I'm home." Going from statue to statue, kissing them on the feet, doing hand gestures, and her parents tried to rein her in. But she was so assured and yelling, "I'm home," as to draw attention to it, and she would not leave. They wouldn't go look at the rest of the museum. They'd only seen half of it. She was assured, and she said she knew some of these people. Later, they finally got her to calm down and finally leave, with, again, half the museum not even being looked at yet, but she was finally attached to a place, and she finally attached a place to her special garden and pillar building, and it was Egypt. That was what she was describing whenever she was telling her mom there was a big cat in front of it. And the pillars had flowers on top, and this didn't make any sense to her. But it started to. So she began to be obsessed with Egypt, got a couple of children's books, and so on, and this became a problem as she began comparing Egyptian beliefs to Christian ones, and church and Bible study, which probably didn't go over too good. And she began comparing the beliefs, and she was asked not to attend. She also became an issue at the Catholic school and became expelled for numerous things, including refusing to sing hymns that referred to Egypt in a bad light. She was also asked not to attend Sunday Mass because she was telling the other kids things about pagan religions and stuff. And again, she's only like, what, she's 5 now and 5.5-ish? Going on 6. Well, at nearly 7, she could read and write English, but she wanted to study ancient hieroglyphics to be able to read her home language, she said, and begged for and eventually got a few books on Egypt. Really semi-kid books with a lot of pictures, one with some transcribed hieroglyphics in it, though, that they got for the reason. The other couple were really pretty much picture books, as I say. But in one of these picture books was an overshot of the temple of Seti at Abydos. And she lost it. Or you could say she found it. She proclaimed that this was her home, and to the side was her garden. Suddenly it all made sense. The pillars were flowers on top, as the ancient Egyptians had that clasp in the capitan on top. Capital. The stairs leading up to it, the garden on the left, which must be there. Which again, this freaked out her parents, of course, you can imagine. But as she looked, she said, "My garden and the trees, the water, where are they?" You see, being 7, she at that point didn't realize that this was thousands of years before her. In fact, it's like 3,400 years before her life that this had gone on, and that there was actually a garden there at one time, but it had long gone away. Also on the next page was the picture of the mummy of Seti, which you see here on the left, Seti the First, which she claimed to know personally. And she said it was a Bibi Set, which was remembered because they thought it was like a baby or whatever, and it was a Bibi Set. Which later you'll find out actually means kind of like my beloved or my lover. She was 7. She became known a little bit around at places from all this having happened, of course, and so on. And at 10, the famed Egyptologist E.A. Wallace Budge, that you may have heard before, met her from her story and offered her to be taught by himself how to read hieroglyphics, which he said she had a knack for and she picked up almost instantly. At age 14, okay, you know that age, right? She started, along with the lucid dreams of her garden and so on that she kept having. She began having nightmares where she was underground in a cave system, but it was squared off, so they realized this was halls and things, but she knew she was underground somehow. And she was in an enclosure and asked questions which she didn't answer, and herself didn't even know the answers to, of course. And when she wouldn't answer, she was beaten with a rod or a big stick and would wake up from it. So not all was fine and dandy, but she was at that age where things change a little bit. And let's skip a couple little things. At 27, she fell in love with a current Egyptian man that was living in Egypt but was in England, probably because of her fascination and that he actually lived in Egypt. And one thing also, that after meeting her, one of the first few dates that they went on, he called her a Bibi. She said, "What is that?" And she goes, "That means my beloved." And you can imagine whenever he said that word to her, do you see this old lady on the right-hand side? Take 60 years off her life and make her a young, real desirable woman if you think you can in your mind. Green eyes and blonde hair here, and she was looking at this guy and she was like, whoa. So she put everything together and she married this man and went to Egypt. And she lived in Egypt. So, in fact, right after the marriage, they actually flew back to Egypt, and upon landing the plane, she was known to have gone out and kissed the ground, exclaiming that she was finally home. She had a son with him, which they named Seti, of course. Shortly after, she began having lucid dreams of other kinds. This was visits from someone she called Horaha. She would wake up in a trance, like sleepwalking, but would write phonetically in Egyptian hieroglyphs on paper, and her husband couldn't seem to stop her. He could wave his hands in front of her and talk to her and couldn't get her to stop. And he didn't want to startle her awake necessarily, but he tried a couple of times and didn't really get much of a reaction out of it and thought it was a sleepwalking thing. Only the problem is she was drawing out all this in hieroglyphics. Eventually she had drawn out over 70 pages worth of hieroglyphic writings in this trance-like sleep state. She'd wake up in a trance, like sleepwalking, but then write phonetically, and this happened repeatedly, and said that she was dictating to her that this was the Horus version of Seti, and that he was dictating to her who she was. Are you ready for this? She was known as Tarshit. This is in the time of Seti the First, some 3,300 years ago or so. She was a priestess of the temple of Seti, or Seth. And that was her and others' special garden that she would go to with her friends. For over a year, she would go into these trances, and she had 70 pages of dictation from beyond. What all did this say then of just 70 pages? Well, if I consolidated it a little bit, like I have before, she was Tarshit, a high priestess of Set, or Seth, under Seti. Seti is a follower of Seth, so we go off that. Her father was a ranked soldier, and her mother was a goods seller and sold mainly vegetables, and her mom died, get this, when she was just 3 years old. Cue that weird music. Unable to raise her on his own, he took her to the temple of Kam el Sultan, and she was raised in the temple, where later she became a priestess. At 12 years old, she was given the choice to either leave, like kung fu. You know, you can either become a kung fu guy or you can leave. Like Top Gun, you can either become a Top Gun raidist or you can do, you know. So after her schooling and going up and given the opportunity to leave, go on her own, or become a Vestal version of Set, she stays and becomes a priestess and gains stature there, but eventually she meets Seti the First and they fall in love. Soon afterwards, she's found out to be pregnant, or she finds out, and then through a grapevine of people that won't shut up, this is discovered and she's taken and interrogated and beaten, and this is all of a sudden matching her nightmares, and in order to avoid the scandal of everything, she took her own life. You know, right whenever I heard this point here, I'm like, you know, they recently found just last year that one of those mummies actually was pregnant. She was pregnant with a kid at the time of it, and they mummified the whole thing, and they didn't take that out like they did anything else, so they knew it was there, but they left it. But wonder if that really might have something to do with it. Well, her husband, after all this, couldn't take being second fiddle to someone that was supposedly in her past life, if you can imagine all of this going on. So he divorced her in 1936, and then her and her son, Seti, moved, and she renamed herself to Omm Seth, which means Mother of Seti. Although she was a lover of Seti, which you see here in the picture, she was also, seriously, the mother of someone who was named Seti. And she had gotten a job in the Egyptian Antiquities Department solely on her knowledge, and for over 15 years had an almost surreal success as an Egyptologist. I'll mention some of these things in a minute, but in 1952, nearing her 50s, she finally, through her job, was able to go to Abydos for the first time. Or was it? They all claim it was the very first time that she had ever gone, but she had taken a pay cut even to finally go to be in Abydos, to finally be in her old home. Once she arrived, she said that I've been here before, and she actually set up an office in one of the temple rooms of the Temple of Seti, and she befriends a cobra. I'm serious. She befriended a cobra that she feeds and that no one can understand really what the deal is in that, but one guy thought that it was just a joke, intended to mean that you're supposed to leave her alone or not to mess with her, but he had to talk to her, so the story was confirmed because this guy found out whenever he tried to enter her room, oh no, she's got a cobra. Rumors began that she was a crazy lady, as you can imagine, with all these things that started to be said about her. She was well respected and claimed to be an invaluable and an example of the temple. She said right where to dig. So, given a good example of one of the things, she, right after getting there in the first place, actually went over and said right where to dig, and that the shape of what her garden was, which people thought was a little bit odd, but she also described the layout and how big it was and the subtle architecture to it, and all of a sudden, whenever they dug it all out, well, they dug down the first point of it and found the thing, and she goes, the corner's about right here, and they found it, so they went ahead and went on what she said, and lo and behold, there it was. Confirmed. In fact, later people went into there figuring out, and they go, yeah, there was trees there and the things that she's all talking about. That smell she had when she was a kid was a jasmine tree or something, and da-da-da, and it was all there, and some of these other things talk about it, and it's kind of double confirmed somehow, but as a kid, there's no way that she would know it. And in fact, she was no way in any deep Egyptology to have even known anything about this. In fact, she was the first person to know that this garden existed. It was literally unknown. They dug out the temple and thing, but it was over here to the left. So all of a sudden, this crazy lady's pretty confirmational, you know? Bam, there it was. No Egyptologist knew about it, but she did. She also pointed out to an unknown tomb in the Valley of Kings. Said it was between two of them and more like this, and sure enough, they found that. They wanted to dismiss her as a crazy lady, but she knew her home well, and she knew it better than all Egyptologists at the time. And where she was and set up her office was actually where she used to live in a past life, or so she said. Right before she died at 81, she said that there was a hidden shaft under the temple, and it held a great secret inside of it. No one's ever found that to this day. A lot of people in archaeology don't look for things like that and so on, but could really be up under one of the floor stones that's there, and you have a shaft that goes down. One of the other things she showed, and it was there, was on the other side of the temple. She said that there was a hidden secret shaft that led down to a tunnel that went down below the temple. And whenever they went over there and started digging, it was right there, like if she knew where the well was, and there it was. And it led down to the little arched opening. And it's still there to this day. It's got one of those little gates on it that they put now, but it's still there. Isn't that amazing? So is this reincarnation? Would you call it a transference of sacred knowledge or something? A glitch in the matrix? Or just a crazy kid that became a crazy lady that was somehow right on about everything that she had to do with a make-believe world she made up in her mind whenever she was a kid? And it all ended up being true? What are your thoughts on this? Let me know downstairs, and give me a like if you like this. Let me know. Ooh. Peace.